Most people are running from failure when they should be sprinting toward it. They waste years trying to avoid pain, protect ego, and preserve some fragile image of success. And in doing so, they never build the strength they actually need to succeed. Let me say something dangerous. You should try to fail. Not because failure feels good, but because it makes you good. Not because failure is the goal, but because it's the gate. The fastest way to grow is to fall. The quickest path to confidence is collapse. Every man who became unshakable was broken first. But most don't see it that way. They treat failure like a red light, a warning, an insult, so they avoid it, they play small, they delay action, and they call it wisdom. But it's not wisdom, it's fear, dressed in caution, and it's stealing your future. Because what you avoid, you hand power to. And what you face, you take power from. You want resilience? Seek rejection. You want confidence? Chase discomfort. You want real, tested strength? Then stop hiding from the one thing that forges it, failure. Failure isn't a curse. It's curriculum. It's pressure that forms identity. It's fire that burns away weakness, hesitation, and pride so that what's left is real. Real conviction, real courage, real power. And you only find that by walking through the things you've been taught to avoid. The silence, the embarrassment, the missed shot, the no, the moment you fall short and keep going anyway. That's where your spine is built. That's where the mask comes off. That's where the man begins. And here's what no one tells you. If you deliberately walk into failure, not recklessly but strategically, you grow faster than anyone still trying to avoid it. Because each time you fall and don't break, something rewires. The voice in your head weakens, and something deeper hardens. That's the goal. Not to be untouched by life, but to be undeterred by it. Not to avoid falling, but to rise through it, faster, sharper, louder. So stop playing not to lose. Start training to fail. Because the man who fails with intention becomes unstoppable by accident. Most people were taught that failure is the opposite of success. That if you're failing, you're moving backward. That it means you're not good enough, not ready, not cut out for it. But that belief is the real failure, because it keeps you small, careful, calculated, and convinced that the goal is to avoid pain instead of grow through it. But success was never about getting everything right. It was about becoming the kind of person who could rise when everything went wrong. Failure doesn't stop you. Caution does. Trying to be perfect does. Needing constant reassurance does. But failure is feedback. It's instruction. It's the exact pressure you need to become unshakable. Most try to tiptoe their way into greatness. They want guarantees. They want to know it'll work before they commit. So they rehearse. They wait. They make endless adjustments, trying to land the perfect move at the perfect time. And while they wait, someone else is failing forward. That person, the one falling on his face, is the one getting stronger. He's not thinking about how he looks. He's not asking for comfort. He's earning his conviction through every fall. Because every time he falls and stands again, something changes. His tolerance increases. His clarity sharpens. His identity evolves. Until failure no longer feels like an ending. It feels like training. Success is not the reward for avoiding failure. It's the result of surviving it. The most resilient people in the world have failed more times than the average person has even tried. And they're not lucky. They're not special. They're just not afraid to fall where others freeze. They've stopped tying their self-worth to their performance. They know failure doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're building. They know the most dangerous thing is not falling short. It's living beneath what you're capable of because you were too afraid to test your limits. There is no growth without friction, no resilience without rejection, no confidence without collapse. So if you're still waiting to move until you're certain it'll work, you're robbing yourself of the only thing that ever does, momentum. The one who embraces failure becomes powerful not because he avoids risk, but because he trains inside of it. He seeks it, learns from it, and becomes the kind of man who cannot be rattled by loss because he's no longer ruled by it. That's the shift. When you stop seeing failure as evidence that something's wrong and start treating it like a sign you're on the right track, a signal that you're stretching, that you're alive, that you're in the game, not just watching from the sidelines. Because in the end, no one remembers how many times you got it wrong. They remember the one time you got it right, and kept going when others quit. Most aren't weak because they were born that way. They're weak because they avoid the very thing that would make them strong. They dodge discomfort. They delay decisions. They tiptoe through life praying to never be embarrassed, never be rejected, never be seen falling. And they call that intelligence. They call it wisdom, strategy, maturity, but it's not. It's fear, polished and dressed up in language that makes it sound responsible. These people aren't chasing greatness. They're avoiding exposure. They're terrified of what they'll find out if they try and it doesn't work. Because deep down, they've tied their identity to their image. And failure? That's a threat to how they want to be seen. So they play it safe. They keep their ideas inside. They avoid risk not because they have no dreams, but because they've decided it's better to protect their ego than to test their potential. They don't want to fail, but more than that, they don't want to find out. Find out if they're really disciplined, if they really believe, if they can really handle pressure without unraveling, because finding out might hurt, and they've been trained to avoid anything that hurts. But let me tell you something you won't hear in most places. The purpose of life is not to stay intact. It's to be tested, cracked, exposed, refined. Because who you are on the surface isn't the person you were born to be. That version only emerges under heat. And failure is heat. It burns off what isn't essential. It shows you what's real, what's weak, what's still running your life from the shadows. When you fail, you meet the parts of you that success was hiding. You meet the impatience, the pride, the ego, the fear of looking small. And when all that comes up, you have a choice. You can run or you can face it. And if you face it, you get to rebuild, stronger, clearer, realer. But most men never reach that place. They stop as soon as they feel pressure. They pull back when the risk feels too raw. They'd rather stay in potential, that safe space where no one knows if they're great or not, than to risk revealing their limits. But that means they never grow past them, because failure isn't a verdict. It's a mirror. It doesn't tell you who you are. It shows you who you've been. And if you're willing to look, really look without flinching, you gain access to something most people never touch, the truth. The truth of your work ethic, the truth of your grit, the truth of your identity. And when one sees truth, even if it humbles them, they become dangerous. Because they are no longer guessing. They're no longer pretending. They know where they stand. And once you know where you stand, you can choose where to go. And you can do it with conviction. So don't run from the mirror. Don't run from the moment it might not work. That's the exact moment your real power shows up. Because the one who's willing to fail is the only one who ever gets far enough to succeed. Failure is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. It is the mechanism by which you are refined. It is the pressure that reveals what's loose, what's weak, what needs to be reinforced. And until you learn to embrace it, not as punishment, but as process, you will never tap into your full capacity. Because pain is the proof that you're stretching, the proof that you're in motion, the proof that you're playing the kind of game that has real stakes. And if you're not feeling it, if everything you do is comfortable, smooth, predictable, you're not growing. You're repeating, coasting, preserving an identity that never gets stronger because it's never being tested. But here's what failure does that nothing else can. It teaches. It teaches what success cannot. Success is a celebration, but failure is feedback. It tells you exactly what needs to be addressed. Not in theory, in real time. It shows you what happens when your plan meets reality, when your confidence meets chaos, when your ideas meet impact. And when you fail and refuse to shrink, you begin to develop something most men never build: resilience. Resilience is not resistance. It's not tensing up and trying to control everything. It's learning to absorb the blow and keep moving, to get hit, adjust, and try again, with sharper focus, deeper conviction, and less attachment to the outcome. Because that's the magic. Once you've fallen enough times and kept getting up, failure stops being scary. It stops being shameful. It becomes normal, expected, just part of the process. And that shift, when failure becomes familiar, is when you become dangerous. Because now you don't flinch, you don't overthink, you act, you try, you experiment, you build. and you do it faster than the one who's still rehearsing for a perfect first try. Every rejection hardens the armor. Every missed shot sharpens the aim. Every loss burns away the ego and leaves behind someone who no longer needs to protect his pride because he's building power. And here's the real reward. When you fail often, you become immune to the fear of it. And once you're immune to the fear of failure, you become capable of everything you've ever wanted. Because the fear of failure is the only thing that ever really stopped you. Not your lack of talent, not your lack of opportunity. The fear, that voice that says, what if it doesn't work? What if I look stupid? What if they don't respect me anymore? But the one who trains in failure doesn't hear that voice the same way anymore. He doesn't need certainty. He doesn't need approval. He needs action. He's not looking for comfort. He's looking for impact. And when you stop seeking comfort and start seeking impact, everything changes. You begin to raise your hand first. You begin to make the ask. You begin to speak up. You begin to move forward, not because it's safe, but because you've decided that playing small is no longer acceptable. And every time you stretch like that, you get stronger. Not in theory, in practice, in your bones, in your breathing, because you've taught your nervous system. We don't stop when it's hard. We train here, we grow here, we rise here. This is how power is built, not by avoiding pressure, but by choosing it, not by resisting failure, but by walking into it with your eyes open. Because when you do that, when you embrace failure as part of your training, you don't just become stronger, you become unstoppable. Most people spend their whole life trying to avoid failure. But the ones who grow the fastest, the ones who rise the farthest, do the opposite. They build failure in. They don't just accept it, they seek it. Not because they enjoy pain, but because they know pain produces power. They know rejection sharpens identity. They know the more often they face discomfort, the less control it has over them. This is the paradox most never understand. The one who fails on purpose becomes the person who can't be stopped by accident. Because failure isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you can train with. It's a tool. And if you learn to use it, you'll grow faster in a year than most men do in a decade. So how do you train with failure? You deliberately stretch. You do things that have a high chance of not working on purpose. You make the ask you're afraid to make. You launch the offer before it's perfect. You tell the truth in rooms where silence is easier. You raise your hand when your voice still shakes. You expose yourself to the possibility of a no, because every no becomes a rep for resilience, a rep for boldness, a rep for becoming immune to the idea that rejection means anything about your worth, because it doesn't. And once you learn that, really feel it, you start to move differently. You start to move without the need to protect yourself, without the need to be impressive. You no longer need everything to go right. You just need to keep going. That's when things get dangerous, in a good way, because you've stopped tying your identity to the result. You've started tying it to your willingness to act. And that's what separates the few who rise from the many who stay stuck. The ones who rise, they've been told no more times than most people have even tried. They've failed in public. They've stumbled in front of others. And instead of running, they turned that pain into fuel. They built a relationship with discomfort, and now they're fluent in it. Most people aren't fluent in discomfort. They flinch, they stall, they numb, they call it logic. They say they're being smart. But really they're hiding from the growth they claim to want. But if you're serious about rising, you can't hide. You have to build the habit of exposure. Rejection can't just be something that happens once in a while. It has to be something you schedule, something you track, something you pursue. That's how you de-shame it. That's how you normalize it. That's how you build spiritual scar tissue, the kind that makes you bulletproof to opinions, immune to hesitation, and magnetic to opportunity. And here's the wild part. When you start seeking failure on purpose, you'll find it less often, because you're no longer acting from fear. You're acting from freedom. And people feel that. They feel it in your energy, in your posture, in your voice. And suddenly, you're not getting rejected as much. You're being received, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. But even when you still hear no, it doesn't matter anymore, because you know why you're doing it. You know that every rejection is a rep, every stumble is a seed, every loss is a lesson that most people will never have the guts to learn. This is how power is built, not by accident, but by deliberate failure, intentional rejection, controlled risk. So if you want to rise, stop chasing comfort, start chasing reps. The one who seeks failure with purpose isn't just training to win. They're training to become immune to fear, to pressure, to rejection itself. Because there's a difference between being tough and being anti-fragile. Tough means you can take a hit. Anti-fragile means the hit makes you stronger. And if you want to live fully, lead boldly, and build something that lasts, you don't just need toughness. You need transformation through pressure. An anti-fragile identity is not afraid of failure. It feeds on it. It doesn't hide from risk. It expands because of it. It doesn't break when rejected. It recalibrates. It doesn't panic in chaos. It finds clarity. That kind of identity doesn't happen by chance. It's not a gift. It's not genetic. It's built, failure by failure, decision by decision, over time. You build it by choosing exposure instead of excuses. You build it by doing what scares you, not once, but often. You build it by letting the old version of yourself fall apart again and again until there's nothing left but what's real, and what's real can't be broken. You see, most men build their identity on outcomes. I'm successful because I won. I'm confident because they approved. I'm valuable because it worked. But when that outcome changes, so does the identity, which means it was never stable to begin with. But when you build identity on action, I'm the person who shows up. I'm the one who moves through fear. I'm the one who speaks even when I shake. Now, it doesn't matter what the outcome is. The identity stays intact. And because it stays intact, it grows stronger. That's the shift, from outcome-based identity to action-based identity. It doesn't matter if you got the yes or the no. You're still the person who asked. It doesn't matter if the launch flopped. You're still the person who built it. It doesn't matter if they laughed or looked away. You're still the person who stood up and spoke. And every time you do that, your self-trust compounds, your mental armor thickens, your emotional tolerance increases, until eventually the world feels lighter, not because it changed, but because you did. This is the essence of anti-fragility. You do not become immune to pain. You become more powerful because of it. Rejection doesn't derail you, it refines you. Delay doesn't shake you, it sharpens you. Mistakes don't define you, they train you. And eventually you stop fearing failure altogether. Not because you're guaranteed to win, but because you've built the kind of identity that always recovers, that always learns, that always reinvents, that always stands back up. That's the person who becomes unstoppable. Because once your sense of self is no longer tied to being right, or liked, or perfect, you become free. Free to take risks, free to speak clearly, free to move forward without hesitation. You no longer shrink to avoid being seen. You no longer silence yourself to stay safe. You move, because movement is who you are. You act, because acting is what you do. And that is what makes you magnetic. That is what makes you powerful. That is what makes the world pay attention. Not your perfection, your presence. The way you carry yourself when things don't go your way, the way you keep going when others stop, the way you hold identity steady when circumstances shift. That's the person people trust. That's the person they follow. That's the person who leads. Because he doesn't just endure failure, he absorbs it, transmutes it, and comes out stronger on the other side. You were not made to avoid the fall. You were made to rise through it. And the more you rise, the less power the fall has over you. Because every time you rise, something inside you rewires. Not just your thoughts, your instincts, your identity. The belief system that once held you back begins to shift from the inside out. Most people think beliefs are built in the mind, but they're not. They're built in the body, in the nervous system, in the way you breathe when things go wrong, in the way your voice shakes or doesn't when you speak what's true, in the way your body reacts after a loss, a no, a moment that didn't go as planned. That's where beliefs are made. Not through theory, through exposure. And failure, that's the most powerful exposure you'll ever experience, because it puts your identity under pressure. And under pressure, the truth comes out. Your programming shows. The old scripts speak. The habits you forgot were there come rushing to the surface. The part of you that's still afraid, still unsure, still craving safety. It shows up in full volume. And most people run from that. They panic when it happens. They think it means something's wrong. But that is the moment of reprogramming. That's the moment the old belief has surfaced to be replaced. Because the subconscious doesn't change when you're comfortable. It changes when you're shaken. It listens to what you do when the voice of doubt is loud, when the outcome is unclear, when the pressure is real. That's when it decides, is this who we are now, or are we going back? And if you keep moving, even when it's hard, your subconscious begins to adapt. It begins to rewire. Not because you said something once, but because you showed something over and over again. Repetition is the language of the subconscious, but it's not just about repeating words. It's about repeating action, repeating courage, repeating belief in the face of risk. When you fail and stand back up, you teach your subconscious that failure is survivable. When you speak boldly and get rejected and then speak again, you teach your subconscious that rejection is not fatal. When you move before you're ready, again and again, your subconscious learns that readiness is not a prerequisite for power. And once it learns that everything changes, your default settings shift, your tolerance for uncertainty expands, your fear response dulls, your emotional reactions compress, you stop flinching, you start acting, and every time you act from that place, you strengthen the belief system underneath. This is how confidence is actually built. Not by convincing yourself with words, but by witnessing yourself act against fear, by seeing your own behavior overrule the inner critic, because belief is built through behavior. Not affirmations, not theory, not positive thinking. Through movement, through moments, through muscle memory. You want to reprogram your mind? Then expose it to risks and respond with action. Do it again, and again, and again, until the old belief system has no data left to support itself. Until the story of "I'm not good enough" no longer matches how you live. Until the fear of failure is replaced with proof that failure is your training ground, not your tombstone. This is why failure is so powerful, because it brings you face to face with your current programming and gives you a chance to overwrite it in real time. You fall short and you get up, you get told no, and you show up again. You feel the fear and you act anyway. Each one of those moments is an imprint, a new command, a signal to your subconscious. This is who we are now, not the person who hides, not the person who waits, not the person who crumbles when things get uncomfortable, the person who moves, the person who leads, the person who grows through the pain. And the more you repeat that identity, in word, in action, in energy, the more your subconscious builds it into your baseline. This is the deep work. It's not glamorous, it's not flashy, it's not always fun, but it works because it rewires you from the inside out, not just to believe, but to become. You start acting differently. Not because you're trying, because it's who you are now. You no longer need to feel confident to move. You no longer need to know the outcome to act. You no longer need applause to keep going, because the identity has changed. The program has changed, the person has changed, and he was changed through failure, not because he avoided it, but because he used it, welcomed it, let it carve away everything that wasn't essential until what remained was real, grounded, unshakable. That is the power of subconscious reprogramming. That is how new beliefs are born. That is how old fears are burned. That is how transformation happens, not just mentally, but neurologically, emotionally, physically. So the next time failure shows up, don't run. Recognize it for what it is, an invitation, a mirror, a message, a test, not to hurt you, to forge you. And if you answer it with action, again and again, the person you become on the other side will no longer fear falling, because his nervous system has learned the truth. What falls can rise stronger. You were not made to avoid the fall. You were made to rise through it. And the more you rise, the less power the fall has over you. Because every time you rise, your identity shifts. Every time you get back up, you teach your mind a new story, not with words, but with motion. That is how belief becomes biology, not by thinking different, but by moving different. And now that you know that there's only one thing left to do, act, not later, not when it's perfect, not once it's guaranteed to work. Right now. Because the fastest way to lock in your new identity is to start living like it's already true. Not pretending, practicing, not faking confidence, but speaking like the person who has already survived the fire, moved through the fear, gotten up after the fall. So here's the challenge. Start failing on purpose, not recklessly, deliberately. Train with failure like it's a skill, because it is. A skill that sharpens your courage, rewires your subconscious, and turns you into someone who no longer waits for permission to lead. Make the ask that might get ignored. Post the thing that might flop. Start the project without knowing how it ends. Tell the truth in the room where silence is safer. Take the risk that stretches your voice, your spine, your edges, and do it again tomorrow. And the day after that. Make rejection a ritual. Make discomfort a rep. Build it into your calendar like it's your job, because if you're serious about becoming unshakable, it is. Every no you hear, that's a notch in the armor. Every awkward moment you walk through, that's another layer of steel. Every time you do the thing while your voice still shakes, that's your nervous system rewiring itself around a new truth. I move anyway. That's where power is built, not in ease, in exposure. So stop over-planning. Stop micromanaging your safety. Stop rehearsing your message for so long that it dies before it ever sees the world. You don't need more time. You need more reps. Put your ideas in the ring. Let the market hit them. Let the crowd ignore them. Let the failure happen. Because failure is the only thing that gives birth to the version of you who can't be ignored. And once you've built that version, not with talk, but with tension, the game changes. You stop asking, will this work? You start asking, how many reps will it take? You don't look for shortcuts. You look for challenges. You don't search for safety. You search for pressure. Because pressure is where the old self breaks and the real one is born. So here's your homework. This week, fail on purpose, not once, every day. Make 5 asks that stretch you. Launch something you're unsure of. Say the thing you've been holding back. Watch what happens. Not to the outcome, but to you. You'll start walking differently. You'll stop shrinking when eyes are on you. You'll stop choking when the stakes are high. Not because you've mastered performance, because you've made peace with imperfection. And that peace, that's what makes you powerful. That's what makes you consistent. That's what makes your presence undeniable. Because the person who has trained with failure isn't afraid to act. They're afraid not to. Because they know every time he delays, he's reinforcing the old story. Every time he plays small, he's voting against the person they're becoming. But every time he speaks, every time he moves, every time he steps in and takes the hit and keeps going, he is rewriting the code. Not with theory, with proof, with lived embodied daily proof. So stop chasing comfort. Chase exposure. Chase rejection. Chase the kind of movement that makes you breathe heavier and think, this might not work. Because when you live there, that's when you start to work. You are not fragile. You are not behind. You are not waiting. You are ready. Now prove it. Because this is no longer about strategy. This is about identity. You've done enough thinking, enough preparing, enough delaying in the name of wisdom. Now comes the moment that separates the talkers from the builders. The moment you stop asking for change and start embodying it. Not someday. Now. Because no breakthrough is coming unless you move. No shift is waiting to rescue you from your silence. The transformation you're craving will only arrive when you act like it's already yours. You don't need to feel like a leader to lead. You don't need to feel powerful to move powerfully. You don't need to feel ready to be ready. You just need to move, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands sweat, even if your stomach turns. Move anyway. Because every time you do, you prove that the old version of you no longer runs the show. You prove that fear is no longer the loudest voice in the room. You prove that failure no longer has the final word. This is what it means to be free. Not to be fearless, but to be unshaken by fear. Not to never fall, but to rise faster every time you do. This is how resilience is built. This is how confidence is earned. This is how identity is forged in the fire of real experience. Because you've learned what most never will. That failure is not your enemy. It is your entrance. It is the door every great person walks through, stripped of ego, stripped of illusion, stripped of excuses, and made strong by what he meets on the other side. You are not the person you were. You've seen too much. You've walked too far. You've stretched past the edge of who you used to be. And now there's no going back. And why would you? You've touched the truth. You've felt what it means to move without asking, to act without apology, to speak without needing to be perfect. That is power, and it's yours now. So go. Walk into the next no. Walk into the silence. Walk into the risk that used to paralyze you. And smile, because now you know this is not the threat. This is the training. And the one who trains inside of failure becomes immune to it. You were never meant to stay unbroken. You were meant to become unbreakable.